Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening. I trust and hope that you are all well. Before I get started, I would like to give a special shout out to all the Patreon members. Sandy Cleveland, Tavia S., Interscare Wifey, Samantha, Andale, aka OKV, Tina Mead, Manna Ash, Felicia Scott, and House of Jen. Thank you all so much for joining the newest membership platform. Today's video is going to be a pinch different. I will be reading urban legends, but these will be known as urban legends that actually turned out to be true. So there's a little twist. Don't forget, if you enjoy what you are hearing, you can buy me a coffee. That link is found below. Also, feel free to check out the newest Patreon memberships, as there are amazing perks that comes with all 3 tiers. And if you'd like to become a member of Back to Ashes here on YouTube, you can find all that information in the description below. With all of that being said, it is time to go back to ashes. For when we arise from the ashes, we are a bigger, brighter, stronger, and happier person in the morning. Sit back, relax, kick back, grab a snack, or tuck in and get warm, and enjoy this dose of vocal melatonin entitled Subscriber Requested True Urban Legends. Right after this introduction, an ad will play. I'll read the first story, another ad will play, and after that, there will be no more ads played within this video. Rats in the toilet bowl. You stagger into the bathroom at 3 a.m. to relieve yourself, groggy with sleep. You lift the lid and position yourself over the toilet. You hear splashing. Turning on the light, you see a rat looking back at you from the bowl. You are never the same again. Urban legends about animals in sewers have been a staple of scary stories, particularly the one about baby alligators being flushed down toilets and then growing to adult size in waste channels. These are most often told about New York. Not true. While alligators and crocodiles have been found in New York, they're generally released and found above ground, and it's thought that New York is too cold for them to survive for very long. But finding a rodent in your toilet, inches from very vulnerable areas of your body, is a particular kind of domestic horror, and one that happens to be possible. Drain plumbing for toilets is typically 3 inches in diameter or more, plenty of space for a rat to climb up. The animals are attracted to sewage lines due to undigested food and feces, and can travel through pipes before emerging through an opening and into your bathroom. And yes, rats can be somewhat testy when they complete their journey. One aquatic rodent bit the rump of a female victim in Petersburg, Virginia in 1999. In Seattle, the issue is common enough that public officials have given advice on what to do in case you encounter one. Close the lid and flush. Cropsy. For years, kids living in and around Staten Island raised goosebumps by relating the tale of Cropsy, a boogeyman who lived in the woods and made a nocturnal habit of disemboweling children. Parents, no doubt, eased their kids' fears by telling them no such monster existed. But he did. In 1987, Andre Rand was put on trial and convicted for a child abduction. Rand, it turned out, may have been connected to a rash of child disappearances in the 1970s. He had once worked at Willowbrook, a defunct mental institution. While he denies involvement in other cases, it's clear Rand's activities had a heavy influence in the word-of-mouth stories that followed. The Leaping Lawyer. Sooner or later, Toronto residents hear the tale of a lawyer who had a peculiar fondness of running full bore into his office windows to demonstrate how strong they were. This practice caught up with him eventually, as he crashed into a window and went sailing to his death. This hobby was actually practiced by Gary Hoy, a senior partner in an area law firm with an office on the 24th floor. On July 9, 1993, Hoy made his signature tackle against the window to impress some visiting law students. The pane finally broke and sent him plummeting to his death. In a eulogy, managing partner Peter Lawyers called Hoy one of the best and brightest at the firm. The Boy Under the Bed. Vacationing couples, newlyweds, Disneyland guests, all have been the subject of an urban legend involving hotel occupants who fall blissfully to sleep only to wake up to an awful stench coming from either under the bed or inside the mattress. Closer inspection reveals that a dead body had been stashed away, presumably not anyone who has died of natural causes. This traveling tale has been confirmed multiple times over. At least a dozen newspaper stories have detailed hotel rooms that have doubled as body disposal sites. While the smell is usually apparent right away, at least one couple slept on a mattress containing a body in Atlantic City in 1999. Cases in Colorado, Florida, and Virginia have also been reported. In 2010, guests at a budget lodge in Memphis were horrified to discover they had been sleeping above the body of Sony Millbrook, a missing person. Fabric softener had been stuffed in the ceiling tiles to try and mask the smell. At least 3 other occupants had also rented the room since Millbrooks' disappearance. A court eventually convicted Millbrooks' boyfriend, Lakeith Moody, of the crime. The Maine hermit. For decades, people who vacationed in central Maine's North Pond area were puzzled by items that would go missing. Batteries and food from cabins, flashlights from camping tents. Rumors spread that a permanent fixture of the area would forage for sustenance and supplies. They were right. For 27 years, Christopher Knight lived alone in the woods, keeping tabs on the hikers, canoeists, and other temporary residents of the grounds. When he was confronted by a game warden in 2013, Knight admitted he was responsible for an average of around 40 robberies a year. Despite the likely protestations of family and friends who dismissed tales of a hermit lurking somewhere in the woods, his identification proved that someone had been watching and waiting for nearly 3 decades. Candyman. Released in 1992 and reimagined in 2021, Candyman, based on a short story by Clive Barker, remains a potent horror tale of the revenge undertaken by a black artist, Tony Todd, murdered in the 1890s for having a relationship with a white woman. While it's not likely you'll be able to invoke him by saying his name several times in a mirror, the pants-soiling idea of having a killer burst through a medicine cabinet is actually based in fact. In 1987, the Chicago Reader published a story about Ruth McCoy, a woman living in a Chicago housing project, who made a frantic call to 911, insisting she was being attacked in her apartment. Responders eventually found her dead of gunshot wounds. Investigators determined that her assailants had gained access to her unit by breaking through the connecting wall in the adjoining apartment and climbing in through her medicine cabinet. The complex was built that way intentionally so that plumbers investigating leaks could simply remove the cabinet to check the pipes. It became a frequent mode of entry for burglars, and in McCoy's case, her killers. The fake cop trick. You may have had an overly concerned parent or friend warn you of people impersonating police officers, using that veneer of authority to attack victims who have let their guard down. While there aren't many who are in full patrol uniform or traveling in marked vehicles, there have been many documented cases of assailants posing as law enforcement. In Bloomington, Illinois, a man used flashlights to get a vehicle to pull over. After walking up to the vehicle, the man tried, unsuccessfully, to overpower the driver before they managed to get away. In Fayetteville, Georgia, a man donned a uniform and pulled over a teenage boy on a bike, forcing him to empty his pockets. Talking to the real police later, the boy told them a second car had pulled up with a man matching the description of someone who had been caught impersonating an officer 2 weeks prior. The legend of the Bunny Man. If you lived in or around Virginia in the 1970s, you were probably exposed to the story of the Bunny Man. In the tale, an escaped mental patient takes to gutting bunnies and hanging them from a bridge underpass. Later, the man is said to have graduated to gutting and hanging teenagers in a similar manner. Locals were cautioned to never be caught near the underpass, which is now known to most people as Bunny Man Bridge on Halloween night. This story likely spawned from the very real presence of a roving madman in the area. In October 1970, a couple reported seeing a man dressed in a white suit and wearing bunny ears who began yelling at them that they were on private property. To punctuate his point, he threw a hatchet at their windscreen, apparently shattering it. There was a second sighting of Bunny Man 2 weeks later, when a security guard spotted a hatchet-wielding man chipping away at a porch railing. Police tried, unsuccessfully, to locate the man. While he didn't disembowel anyone, the thought of an adult wielding both a hatchet and a pair of bunny ears somehow manages to just be damn right disturbing. The legend of Polybius. Vintage video gamers have long traded stories about a coin-operated arcade game circa early 1980s Portland that had strange effects on its players. The game, titled Polybius, was alleged to have prompted feelings of disorientation, amnesia, game addiction, and even suicide. The machine's cabinet was said to be painted entirely black, and it was rumored that stern-looking men would sometimes visit arcades to collect information from the machine before disappearing. Was it a CIA experiment spun off from MK Ultra, the psychoactive drug study conducted on unsuspecting suspects? To this day, no one knows. Charlie No Face. Imagine finding yourself outside and alone in the dark on a residential street. You hear footsteps approaching. Suddenly, a man with a misshapen face appears. You run, terrified beyond words. He spread the story of the man with no face throughout Pennsylvania. Charlie No Face, also called the Green Man, was actually a man named Ray Robinson, and he was no figment of anyone's imagination. Born in 1910, Robinson was disfigured as the result of an electrical accident at the age of 8. He touched active wires which effectively maimed him. Knowing his appearance could be disconcerting, Robinson took to taking strolls after dark. He would often walk a path along Route 351 in Beaver County, Pennsylvania. While his intentions were honorable, encountering Robinson in the dead of night inevitably led to spreading stories about a boogeyman haunting the town. Robinson died in 1985. The all-too-real corpse decoration. Notorious outlaw Elmer McCurdy took on a second life following his death. In 1911, the embalmed corpse of McCurdy became a grim sideshow attraction throughout Texas, with people eager to see the famed criminal on display in funeral parlors and carnivals. Though it's hard to document all of his travels, he eventually wound up in Long Beach, California, where someone apparently mistook him for a prop. McCurdy was hung in a funhouse at the New Pike amusement park, his humanity discovered only after a crew member on The $6 Million Man, which was filming there in 1976, tried to adjust him, dislodging his very real arm. The following year, his corpse was put to proper rest. The Slender Man. Slender Man is the prototypical internet urban legend. It began innocently enough in 2009. Eric Knudsen posted to a thread on the Something Awful forums dedicated to creating paranormal images. His submission featured an out-of-focus figure standing next to a tree. Who knew that this single post would ignite the imaginations of countless posters and future fans? Other forum members soon built off Knudsen's initial submission, adding their interpretations of Slender Man. These new details would flesh out the supernatural figure in what would become known as the Slender Man mythos. It even resulted in the creation of a popular web series named Marble Hornets. Unlike other urban legend villains, Slender Man doesn't actually do anything. He doesn't kill anyone or threaten them. He just stands there, waiting and watching. Talk about building psychological dread. Slender Man could have remained confined to the internet, but a few devoted fans decided to bring him into the analog world. In 2014, two 12-year-old girls nearly stabbed another girl to death in a highly publicized case. In another incident, a Cincinnati teenager attacked her mother and set fire to their house. All three perpetrators claimed their actions were a tribute to Slender Man. After these real-life tragedies, Slender Man's popularity waned and never recovered. Nearly 10 years after Knudsen's initial submission, Hollywood released a feature film about the monster. It flopped at the box office. No one wanted the story anymore. The internet had moved on. Maybe the tragedies contributed to this, or, like all things originating from the internet, Slender Man hit his expiration date. The Momo Challenge. The Momo Challenge is the perfect example of how random elements can come together and, fueled by social media, lead to a mass panic. Who's Momo, you might ask? Momo is a creepy-looking bird woman who sends a series of tasks to complete if you text a number on WhatsApp. The tasks start off innocently enough. For example, the instructions might tell you to watch a horror movie by yourself in the dark. No biggie, right? If you're a horror fanatic who accepted this challenge because you like thrills, this won't seem too hard. Unfortunately, it doesn't stay that way. The tasks become increasingly dangerous and culminate in encouraging self-harm and suicide. Failure to complete a task for any reason leads to threats of violence and doxing. Originating in a Facebook group, the Momo challenge gained worldwide infamy when YouTuber Rain Bot made a video about it. Soon after, warnings about the challenge spread. The police service of Northern Ireland made a Facebook post urging parents to monitor their children's activity on WhatsApp. Kim Kardashian even highlighted the challenge and its dangers on her Instagram. Internet trolls fueled the panic by splicing images of Momo into YouTube videos targeting kids. Like all urban legends, the Momo challenge has roots in reality. The signature image is a sculpture of an ebuum, a Chinese bird woman from folklore said to have died in childbirth. The original piece of artwork was made by Kaisuke Asawa and was displayed in a Tokyo gallery. As for why the Momo challenge seized public attention, simple. It preyed on social anxiety, in this case, parental fears, about what children were doing online while unsupervised. Hide and seek alone. Do you love playing hide and seek but hate having to play with other people? Don't worry. There's a version for you. Haitori Kakarunbo, or Hide and Seek Alone, is a game that allows you, as the name suggests, to play hide and seek by yourself. All you need is a doll, red thread, rice, nail clippings, salt water, and a pointed object. Think a pencil, not a knife. Trust me. If these requirements sound suspiciously like a summoning ritual, you're not wrong. In theory, you're playing hide and seek with whatever possesses your doll. That's why you choose a pencil, because the last thing anyone wants is the possessed doll to be anywhere near a knife. Haitori Kakurimbo first circulated on a now-defunct Japanese horror forum in 2007. In true creepypasta fashion, the instructions were copy and pasted across the internet until 2008. They reached Soya in Underworld, a blog that translates Japanese ghost stories, urban legends, and creepypastas to English. From there, the urban legend exploded. People soon uploaded videos, supposedly chronicling their experiences with the ritual. Some investigators even attempted to use Haitori Kakurimbo to communicate with spirits. A YouTube channel even collected videos of people playing the game from Japanese form to channel. Like other internet urban legends, Hide and Seek Alone experienced a meteoric rise and then petered out into internet obscurity. Still, we'll always remember those videos of warped television screens and weird sounds in dark, empty houses. The Blind Maiden. This internet urban legend originated in Spain. There supposedly exists a website that can only be accessed at midnight during the new moon. You also must be alone and sitting in the dark. If you successfully access the website, you'll be greeted with disturbing images of terrified children with their eyes ripped out. In true sketchy website tradition, a pop-up window appears and offers two choices. If you click accept, a woman will appear behind you and rip out your eyes. She'll also snap a photo to add to the website's gruesome gallery. If you decline, you'll receive the ripped out eyes. Sounds like a lose-lose situation. As for how the urban legend spread, supposedly one child was so scarred by the woman's appearance and fainted. The blind maiden assumed he was dead and left, allowing him to spread the story. The Black-Eyed Kids. The Black-Eyed Kids are such a staple of paranormal lore that people may not realize that stories of these infamous beings initially spread via the internet. The first Black-Eyed Kid story was recounted by Texan reporter Brian Bethel on a paranormal mailing list in 1996. Were they demons, vampires, aliens? No one knew, but paranormal fans loved to discuss the possibilities. For years, Bethel's two encounters remained the only Black-Eyed Kid encounters shared on the internet. That changed in 2013, when MSN Weekly Strange featured more stories about the creepy children. The following year, British tabloid The Daily Star ran 3 front-page stories about Black-Eyed Kid encounters. Soon thereafter, reports of Black-Eyed Kid sightings rose around the world, to be told on podcasts, YouTube videos, and many Reddit threads. If there's anything that internet urban legends have taught us, it's that they often burn bright and fast. It coincides with the nature of the internet, where viral memes and stories have a limited shelf life. Sometimes they take a life of their own and become self-sustaining. Because in the end, urban legends, whether they spread by word of mouth or on Reddit threads, depend on people to keep them alive. Clown Man. I lived right outside Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania as a teenager, in a little poor town called Swissvale. The next communities over are Rankin and Braddock, which are still production heyday ghost towns that have been plagued with poverty. A strip of woods lined by a train track follow the river upon which our communities reside. Right next to the river looms the decrepit abandoned steel mill I believe was once called Carey Furnace. As teenagers do, my friends and I used to cut through the park across the tracks into the river to drink, smoke pot, and hang out. Eventually, we started exploring the steel mill. I personally loved it. The graffiti and sculptural artists, the wildlife had randomly took over, the bums who made it home, etc., all made it a worthwhile adventure. I became comfortable there. Then my friends told me about an abduction and sexual assault of a teenager whose naked and bloody body ended up strung up on a set of city steps. The killer was an insane man who dressed as a clown with a horrid bloodstained mask. He lives in the woods and in the steel mill. He walks the tracks with a butcher knife he hasn't even bothered to clean. Don't come here alone. I got into a fight with a boyfriend one night and stubbornly decided to walk alone from the river, across the tracks and through the woods. I got to the tracks, turned, and looked at the steel mill. Further down the tracks I saw a figure. I couldn't see a face, but the baggy pants were rather clown-like. I ran like hell. I've never felt fear like that before. It was probably a bum, but who takes chances with an urban legend like that? The Puebla Tunnels. Citizens of Puebla City, located in the southeast of Mexico, told folktales about a mysterious network of tunnels hidden beneath the city. For hundreds of years, no such tunnels were ever found, so people assumed that they were nothing more than the stuff of legends. But then, in 2015, a construction crew discovered a very real tunnel beneath the city. Crews began excavating the site and eventually discovered around 6 miles of tunnels snaking underneath Puebla's streets. The tunnels, which are believed to have been constructed from the 16th century all the way through the 19th century, have been open as a tourist attraction today. The Alice Killings. The story of the Alice Killings is one of Japan's most famous urban legends, as well as one of its newest. The legend revolves around a series of killings that supposedly occurred between 1999 and 2005. The victims had no relationship to one another, and the killings seemed unrelated in every way, but they shared a haunting similarity. A single playing card was found by each body with the word Alice written in the victim's blood. For an unsubstantiated urban legend, the specifics of these murders are very consistent, downright to the names and grisly details of the murder victims. The uniformity of this legend, as well as its popularity, is most likely thanks to the internet. There is no evidence, however, that these killings took place at all, and whether or not they did is hotly debated. The truth is, though, that there was a serial killer who identified his murders with playing cards, but he operated in Spain, not Japan. Luckily, this playing card killer was caught in 2003 and sentenced to 142 years in prison. The Dog Boy. This Arkansas-based urban legend about a werewolf-like dog man roaming around the town of Quitman merely embellishes a true tale. In 1954, a boy named Gerald Bettis was born. The rumors around town held that he was cruel and sadistic, and that he liked to capture stray animals and do twisted experiments on them. His cruelty only grew as he got older, and he was abusive to his aging parents. In 1981, his father was found dead in the family home, and his death is surrounded in mystery. The newspaper said it was illness, but many townspeople believed it was murder. Bettis then kept his mother basically imprisoned in the house until Adult Protective Services placed her in protective custody. His mother testified against him in court, and he went to prison, where he died in the 1980s. People say that his spirit still haunts the house where he grew up, and where his father died. In many versions of the legend, his ghost walks on all fours and is shaggy like a dog, while in others, he appears as a towering man wearing a brown jacket and bow tie. Le Lorion. Recently, the people of Switzerland began telling stories about a mysterious figure who walked through the Mauls forest wearing camouflage and a gas mask. For 10 years, there was no evidence that this figure existed. Just a few eyewitnesses' accounts in the newspapers. According to these accounts, he didn't show any signs of being dangerous or malicious. but he sure was creepy. With no concrete evidence of his existence, the figure remained in the realm of folklore. People began calling him the Ghost of Mauls or Le Lion. In 2013, though, his existence was proven when a pedestrian snapped a photograph of Le Lion. A few months later, his gas mask and camouflage coat appeared in the woods, along with a mysterious note hinting that he was harmless and could no longer stand being viewed as some kind of monster. Whether Le Lion actually committed suicide or simply abandoned his persona and wandering habits remains unknown. Big Nose George. It is not uncommon in horror movies for things made of skin or bones or something else more morbid. This was a case, however, where it was more than just a horror trope. George Parrott, or Big Nose George, was an old Wild West criminal. He stole horses, robbed stagecoaches and trains, and even murdered the local sheriff and detective. He did, at least, until he got caught. He was found guilty of murder and sentenced to death by hanging. After the deed was done, no one came forward to claim the body. 2 doctors present at the time asked to have the body for medical study. Though one of the doctors did study his brain, George's corpse was mainly used for not medical purposes. In fact, the cadaver was skinned and made into shoes, and part of the skull was given as a gift to a medical protege. The rest of the body was burned in a whiskey barrel. The shoes still exist today and can be viewed at the Carbon County Museum in Rawlins, Wyoming. The Mangled Finger Woman. I think most of us have probably heard the story of someone being buried alive. Some person was proclaimed dead and was buried but later woke up, alive in their casket. When the grave is later dug up, the person is found dead by suffocation, with horribly mangled fingers and scratch marks on the inside of the coffin. The story of Octavia Hatcher is likely the source of this legend. She fell ill and went into a coma in the late 1800s. Not long after, she was pronounced dead and swiftly buried. Not even a week later, other people began showing similar symptoms to Octavia, falling into a coma with extremely shallow breathing. These individuals, however, woke up. Her husband, worried she had been buried alive, ordered her to be unburied. Sadly, his suspicions were correct. Octavia was found dead in her casket with a scratched face and bloody fingers. The lining had been torn from the coffin's lid. She was shortly reburied and is said to haunt the cemetery in which she is buried in. Slave Master. Anyone who was online during the early days of the internet probably remembers seeing forwarded emails warning about someone with the screen name Slave Master. Snopes says the emails were probably straightforwarded. If someone with that screen name reached out, he should be avoided at all costs. Behind the screen, it was said, was a man looking to convince unsuspecting women to meet him in real life so that he could kill them. Sound unlikely? It was 100% true, and his name was John Edward Robinson Sr. Vanity Fair says those at his church knew him as a devoted family man, neighborhood activist, and brilliant entrepreneur. Local authorities apparently knew he had once been convicted of being a con artist, but no one suspected he had an apartment just across the Missouri border, where he kept the women he lured into meeting him. Upon investigation, it was discovered he had a long history of generally horrible behavior before he even adopted his slave master identity. He was ultimately linked to the disappearance of a number of women, including a Polish college student and a 27-year-old home care nurse. Finally, a 34-year-old woman he targeted called the police. When they searched his home, they found bodies sealed in 55-gallon metal barrels. Robinson had beaten his victims to death, and although it's unclear just how many women he murdered, police did find more bodies that he had been keeping for years. Souvenirs from your vacation. Here's the gist. Someone goes on vacation, then comes back and starts suffering severe headaches or earaches not long after. The cause? Bugs crawled out the hapless vacationer's ears and nested in their brain. Sorry, but this one just isn't true. It's happened a couple of times. In 2013, Rochelle Harris returned to Britain from a holiday in Peru. When she started hearing scratching noises, she was a little worried. It got worse when the headaches started. And when she woke up with a mysterious liquid on her pillow, she decided to seek medical attention for what she thought was an ear infection. The truth? A fly she swatted out of her ear in Peru had laid eggs in her ear canal, and she is now home to a family of maggots. She needed surgery to remove them all. Then, in 2015, The Independent reported that Yadiro Rostro underwent surgery after suffering for 9 months of headaches. The cause? Tapeworm eggs in her brain. Doctors were pretty sure she picked up the parasite when she was in Mexico 2 years prior, and that it had traveled through her bloodstream and into her brain, where it laid eggs. Good luck enjoying another vacation. Here, Piggy Piggy. It's part urban legend, part crime drama trope. It's one about the serial killer, or assassin or cheater, who almost gets away with murder by feeding the bodies of his victims to his pigs. It's used in a lot of fiction, and it happened a lot in real life. In 2013, The Telegraph reported on a police investigation from southern Italy. According to taped phone conversations, Francesco Ricosta was murdered during a mafia turf war. Then his body was chopped up and fed to pigs. In 2015, USA Today reported Susan Monica had been found guilty of not only murdering 2 men, one in 2012 and one in 2013, but of also disposing of the bodies by feeding them to her pigs. But the idea goes back even further, to one of Canada's most infamous serial killers. Robert Pickton was arrested in 2002 for the murders of 26 women over the course of around 6 years. Most were snatched off the streets of Vancouver, and according to the testimony of those who knew him, he bragged of killing dozens of women and disposing of the bodies by chopping them up and feeding them to his pigs. Thousands of DNA samples were ultimately recovered from his farm, and according to a jailhouse confession, the only thing he regretted was being stopped, just one victim short of 50. Later, says the Seattle Times, Pickton would claim he was framed. The Hitchhiker. By 1942, there had been at least 79 reports of encounters with a vanishing hitchhiker from all over the United States. So many that folklorists Richard Beardsley and Rosalie Hinckley decided to make a formal study of the phenomenon. In one variation, a young man meets a girl at a dance. She asks for a ride home, and the man complies. They hop in his car and head down the road. Before they reach their destination, however, the woman asks to be let out, saying she can walk from here. Again, the man complies, but as he drives further down the road, he discovers a gigantic car wreck and the dead body of that girl inside. The Wendigo. An evil spirit native to the northern coast of the United States and the Great Lakes, the Wendigo may appear human, but it is not. Based on the legends of the Algonquin-speaking people, the Wendigo is an early form of the idea of a zombie or a cannibal, something that was once human but now lives off human flesh. Tales of the Wendigo were used to allegorize the dangers of greed. While it made its first appearance in the earliest days of the native indigenous people of the Americas, the same spirit has gone on to influence popular culture, most notably as the driving demonic force in Stephen King's Pet Sematary. In today's time, there have been hundreds of claims of Central and Eastern dwelling Americans claiming multiple sites of the Wendigo. The abandoned pools. Pools were a huge attraction to schools back in the day. Swim teams were prominent in almost every school, but as time passed, they faded into obscurity, and so did the swimming pools. Many schools have the rumors of a supposed swimming pool room. However, some people have ventured into private territory and have seen the pool rooms themselves. A specific example of this is at the University of Rochester. There is a room that used to house a swimming pool, but now it is being used as a place to store old desks and chairs. The room is eerie as the lighting is dim, and the pool is stacked high with old chairs and desks. However, what's even creepier is the fact that there are red footprints that line the outer edge of the pool that are actually stained in blood. Anesthesia nightmares. There have been horror stories told about people going to get surgery and the anesthesia not taking effect, so they could feel everything happening to them. This was mostly a myth, until it came out that a few cases of this happening were actually real. The process includes adding anesthesia to a patient to induce numbing, and the patient is also put to sleep. However, sometimes patients require a bit more anesthesia than most. This only happens to 0.02% of people requiring surgery, but it can be a traumatic experience to those few unlucky people. The ability to not be able to wake up to tell doctors that you can feel the pain is truly a living nightmare. To the few people that this has happened to, it has been reported that most have committed suicide years later because they have PTSD of the incident. At night, it's said they wake up with the same pain they felt years ago. There are now safer precautions surgeons take to make sure to prevent this from happening again. Or do they? Alright, dear listeners, now comes a time where I will read a lot more shorter urban legends, not necessarily true, but are still very spooky. Colonel Buck's recurring tombstone stain. Passerbys are often keen to point out the oddly shaped mark resembling a leg that stains the tomb of the former justice of the peace. That's because rumor has it that Colonel Jonathan Buck ordered a young woman to be put to death for practicing witchcraft. Allegedly, her leg rolled out of the fiery blaze, and in retaliation, the witch put an eternal curse on Buck's final resting place in Bucksport, Maine. While any of that cannot actually be confirmed, the tombstone has reportedly been scrubbed thoroughly several times, but the leg-shaped stain continues to reappear. Today, it's become somewhat of a tourist attraction. The Man on the Moon. The pivotal moment for all humanity when Americans became the first people to step foot on the moon. Yeah, of course that was scripted. But the quotation that we all know and love is not what astronaut Neil Armstrong actually said. We all know the phrase as one small step for man, one giant leap for mankind. But what he actually said was one small step for a man, one giant leap for mankind. Listening to this phrase on enhanced audio equipment, you can actually hear what he actually says. The house at the bottom of the lake. Resting in the murky depths of Connecticut's Gardner Lake is a fully intact house. That much is confirmed by the Hartford Current, no less. Supposedly, the house sank beneath the surface when a family attempted to move it across the frozen lake in the midst of a 19th century winter. The really eerie part is that, to this day, fishermen report hearing strained musical notes gurgling up to the surface of the lake, supposedly from the parlor room piano. Laced with poison. Ever wondered if the medicine you're dutifully taking as prescribed includes any extra ingredients? Thanks to the modern-day tamper-resistant seal, you can rest assured that your medicine is mixed just like the doctor ordered. Unfortunately, this packaging was developed for a reason. In 1982, someone got it in their head to inject potassium cyanide, a deadly poison, into multiple bottles of Tylenol. After several people died in what came to be known as the Tylenol murders, a Federal Drug Administration stepped up to the plate and came out with regulations requiring all medicinal manufacturers to produce seals that were tamper-proof. The Library Killer. American libraries are always represented to us as being as spacious and silent as a church. Long, endless corridors are separated by shelves of books, and hanging green lamps disperse only a few luminous fluxes. In short, these are often well-isolated, silent, and above all, dark places, ideal for committing a murder without being worried. This is precisely what happened in 1969. Betsy Aardsma was a 22-year-old student who was seeking a book in the Pattee Library in Pennsylvania. She was stabbed in the middle of the aisles without anyone realizing it. The murder took place without a sound and without anyone seeing anything. To this day, the murderer has never been unmasked. The killer lived with the victims. The Gruber family was living peacefully on their farm some 70 kilometers north of Munich, when one fine day they heard footsteps in the attic, but they did not worry so far since birds or rats could well be at the origin. One fine day, Andreas Gruber, the father of the family, discovered footprints in the snow, coming from the edge of the woods, up to his farm, but no footprints left. Then he also discovered a newspaper that no one had bothered to bring it back, not to mention that the keys to the house were also missing. Nothing had been reported to the police. The maid decided to leave as she was scared and said the house was haunted. On May 31st, 1922, a new servant took up her post. A few hours later, a real carnage took place in this house. The parents, the widowed daughter, as well as her 2 children, just like the servant, were killed with a pickaxe. To this day, the crime remains unsolved. Body farms. This one may be a new urban legend for people because they're not as known. However, it was rumored that body farms are set up for research and education purposes. This isn't just an urban legend, and sadly, they are a real thing. The main purpose of the body farms is to study the decomposing human body. These farms can be up to 25 acres and can feature dozens of deceased people. These studies will help investigators and law enforcement find out more about the human body in different settings that could then help them solve cases. It is also used as a tool to help with the aid of teaching newer cadets that need a crash course on the human body. The bodies that are on the farms can be retrieved 3 different ways. The first way is to retrieve them from the morgue when a body is unidentified or unclaimed by family members. Secondly, a body can be donated to the research facility. And thirdly, the family of the deceased can give their body to research. This is a grim way to research, but it seems necessary. Let's just hope nobody accidentally stumbles onto a body farm by accident. The bloody game of tug-of-war. An unknown urban legend surfaced in the 90s after a game of tug-of-war had gone wrong. 2 men had their arms ripped off due to the sheer force of the rope being pulled. It turns out this story was true. It happened in 1997 in Japan. The rope was under intense pressure of over 1,600 people pulling the rope, which is about 80,000 kilograms of force being pulled on this rope. It didn't take but seconds until the rope snapped, severing the arms of 2 young men. Luckily, they were near a hospital, and they were rushed to it to have several hours of microsurgery performed on reattaching their arms. Other reports of tug-of-war accidents have been reported all over the world, one even happening at a high school. Who knew tug-of-war could be so dangerous? Now we'll end this segment with people who share their hometown's creepiest urban legends. The H-Man. There is a local legend about a campsite I used to go camping at here in upstate New York. Legend says that there is a man they call the H-Man that lives out in the woods near the campsite. One year, a group of Boy Scouts were camping out there, and one of the boys went missing. They didn't find him until they started packing up to go home. As they were cleaning up and packing up their belongings, they found the missing kid. He was dead under one of the mattresses with an H carved into his chest. They say when the H-Man kills campers, he carves an H into your chest. Growing up camping here, all of us kids were terrified of the H-Man. They say if you go exploring deep enough into the woods, you can find his home. Well, there is an abandoned house deep in the woods we found one time. I started shitting my pants. Creepy thing was, it was so deep in the woods, but there was no roads leading to it, no paths leading to it. Just a single abandoned house, sitting in the middle of the woods. If you go camping in Minerva, New York, beware of the H-Man. The evil words on the tombstone. I live out in a rural area that was settled a long time ago. The story goes that in the days of the first settlement, there was one teenage girl who was very into the supernatural and began to experiment in witchcraft. At the same time that she was experimenting with witchcraft, several villagers noticed that suspicious things were happening. They had a bad harvest that year. Several people had gotten sick, and a small boy even died. The villagers were lamenting their hardships when somehow it came out that a teenage girl was experimenting with dark magic. The villagers became enraged and rallied to have the girl burned at the stake. They asked her if she had any last words. She asked that her last words be put on her tombstone, and she recited a long speech. These words were placed on her tombstone. It is said that anyone who reads these words out loud at her grave will have misfortunes for a short time after reading the words, and that if you curse her name, that any nearby churches will burn down. I have visited that grave. I don't believe in the supernatural, but I can't explain what happened. My friends and I went to the grave. We had been telling ghost stories beforehand, so we were a little bit jumpy. We approached the grave late at night, close to midnight. There was a horse farm nearby, and we could hear the horses whinny. It was a rather bright night as the moon was out in full. We arrived at the grave, and one of my friends reads the text on the tombstone in full. Nothing happened, until we heard a very loud and seemingly very close neigh from the nearby horses, along with the thundering of hooves running, which at the time sounded incredibly closer than it should have possibly been. I'm not ashamed to say I and my friends squealed and ran as fast as we could to the car. I jumped up front while the driver jumped in. He could not turn on his car. In the panic, 2 girls jumped on my lap and everyone was screaming. We needed to get the hell out of there. I slammed the door. Little did I know, one of the girls had her hand still on the outside of the car. I slammed the door on her hand. The door was locked even though no one had locked the doors beforehand. I had to manually unlock the door as this girl screamed with her crushed hand in the door, and then I opened it. The car started, the lights came on. I shut the door again and we drove off. Luckily, this was a car that did not have metal around the windows, so while it was painful, it didn't exactly break anything. I will say, though, that whether it was all in our heads or if it was something more at play, I will never know. I do know that I don't plan on going back to that cemetery anytime soon. And that, dear listeners, is the end of these true urban legends mixed with a little urban legends told by folks from their old cities. If you are sleeping, I hope Slumberland is treating you kindly. If you're awake, I hope you've enjoyed this collection. Until next time, I'll be reading to you soon. Have yourself a good morning, a good afternoon, or a good night.